Last year, I made the decision to grant Game of the Year, my Game of the Year, which is far more reliable and trustworthy than Jeff Keighley's Game of the Year. I decided to give Game of the Year to Super Mario Bros. Wonder because it was a fantastic game that people were downplaying for very petty reasons. Oh, it's a 2D platformer. Oh, it's just another Mario game. Oh, it's a Switch game at the end of the life cycle, right? Nobody cares about this. This is a really strong testament just how strong the bias against Nintendo actually is because Mario Wonder has gone on to be hugely successful. It's very popular. I've gone back and played it again recently and had an absolute blast with it, right? The game is phenomenal in every way, shape, and form, and yet gaming YouTubers tried to turn up their noses at it, just like they did with New Super Mario Bros. Back in the day, and just like they did with the Super Mario Land games, right? Every single time another one of these games comes out, we have to do with people like coming out trying to say that it looks the same as the old one, that they haven't done anything new, that this doesn't innovate, and that's never been true, especially not with the new Super Mario Bros. Games. But with Wonder, this was a turning point, I think, because people tried to do their old tricks of just doing what they did with Tears of the Kingdom. Oh, nobody's talking about it, right? They tried doing that thing like, this is just new Super Mario Bros. Wonder, right? Because of course the new series of games have been successfully downplayed for the past decade, even though those are hugely successful 2D platforming games in their own right, and revitalized the genre after like a 15 years of irrelevancy, right? New Super Mario Bros. Is a fantastic series of games, right? I've always been a big advocate for them, and I'm not taking that away from them as I talk about this topic. But during the new Super Mario Bros. Era, and I think go up until up till the Wii era, the big prevailing narrative among the gaming community was that NES Mario is supreme, it's the greatest thing ever, it'll never be topped, yada yada yada. And for the longest time, I felt that was true to a certain extent because the NES era was like innovative. It established all these iconic franchises, right? It did so much to like establish these brands and really show people just what made them unique and special, right? I did not want to take that away from them, right? So when people try to say things like, "Oh, Mario Sunshine isn't as good as the older Mario games," right? Like, you kind of have to let it slide, right? Like again, because Sunshine has a lot of problems, right? There are things that Sunshine could have done better, and like I was willing to acknowledge that at the time, right? Just like with the new Super Mario Bros. Games, oh, these aren't as good as the NES games. I was willing to let it slide at the time because I had too much respect for the older established games that I had played, that I had enjoyed, that I had not grown up with, right? But I understood that there was a reason why people were so attached to these products and why they wanted to keep supporting them. And it was almost a noble thing, right? Actually, it was a noble idea, right? Because the enduring success and legacy of those games demonstrates why Nintendo will never fade away in the gaming sphere. They are always going to be seen as the progenitors of the genre and the purveyors of the most successful gaming IPs in the industry, right? Like the enduring popularity of Super Mario Bros. The fact that kids today still know and play of this game, right? It speaks volumes as to how like legendary that game is and how much it stood the test of time. But upon my recent playthrough of Super Mario World, Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario Bros. 2, the original Super Mario Bros., right? I have over the past year like extensively gone back and played the original Super Mario Bros. Games, right? I've gone through all of them several times. I know them back to front. I actually just beat Super Mario Bros. 3 on stream a while back. I think twice. I think I did it on Super Mario Advance 4 and Super Mario All Stars, right? So like the Game Boy Advance version and the Super Nintendo version, right? So I've spent a lot of time playing Super Mario Bros. 3 in particular lately because I felt like I felt like in my experience, Mario 3 is the one I've played the least, right? It feels like it was the one I was least familiar with. It was the one that I couldn't like get through easily. It was one that I felt like, okay, let's play through this game over and over and over again. Like know all the secrets, know all the intricacies, know what it does well, what it doesn't do well, that yada yada. Yada. Like again, I wanted to familiarize myself with Mario 3 before I really definitively made this statement because this is going to be the king of hot takes for a lot of people. Super Mario Bros. Wonder is better than Super Mario Bros. 3. Mario 3 has too short of level design, right? The mechanics are kind of slippery, right? It feels kind of unbalanced, right? Like it relies too much on auto scrolling levels, right? And the final two worlds are kind of disappointing, right? Again, Mario Bros. 3 is not a bad game. But when I compare it to Super Mario Bros. Wonder, which has all these crazy mechanics like thrown all throughout all of the worlds, right? It has new things in every level, all these creative, unique power-ups that are utilized in really interesting ways, right? The badge system, multiplayer, an amazing hidden final stage, right? When you just look at all the content that Super Mario Bros. Wonder offers, right? The reality is Super Mario Bros. 3 cannot compete. Like the reality is, and this has been true for a long time, the iconic Nintendo games that we all love on NES and Super Nintendo have been outdone, right? All of these games now have better versions, successors on newer Nintendo hardware, right? It took a long time for them to get there, right? It took a long time for them to top the original Legend of Zelda with Breath of the Wild, right? With the whole open-ended design and stuff like that. Like it took a while for them to produce a sequel to Metroid, right? And it took a while for them to make a Mario game as wild and innovative and fun as like the NES games, right? Wonder feels completely fresh and original. Uh, and I don't think the NES fans, the hardcore like boomer audience, like really appreciate that because I saw a lot of people try and disavow everything that Mario Wonder was doing, right? Like, I saw Mike Matei spurging out. Like, oh, I'm 40 years old and I'm watching Piranha Plant sing. Oh, this is so lame. Like, come on. Come on. Like again, this is the reality for a lot of these people is that they like to pretend that Mario was some like cool badass shit. Like, oh, this wasn't for kids, man. But like you were a kid when you first played this. Like I don't understand what's so hard to understand about this because I keep seeing this like pop up time and time again. Like, oh, Zelda was cool and hardcore back in the day, but they casualized it. Oh, Nintendo was cool until they started catering to children. Like, there's just no self-awareness from these people. And I do think the reason this mindset has been dying in recent years is because that like people don't go into this stuff like expecting some cool badass experience anymore, right? They go in because they want to play the game and appreciate it for what it is. Whatever it is. They're not going to play Splatoon and just like, "Oh, this is a post-apocalyptic shooter. Like why aren't they shooting brown ink everywhere on both sides? Like why isn't it more realistic? Why isn't it dark? Like, oh, like they should take the setting more seriously." Like nobody is going to do that in 2024. Like it is a dead mindset. It's not something that ever really comes up in today's gaming discussion because it's not something that really affects the end product. But the whole Nintendo is kiddie argument is a major defining feature of why so many people like jump to Sega and then later PlayStation. Like, oh, Nintendo's for kids. I'm not a kid anymore. And so like it just led to this really weird situation where for the longest time, people who grew up on NES and Super Nintendo games started demonizing everything that came out after that, right? I remember seeing people like say that like Ocarina of Time ruined Zelda because like Ganon wasn't like a pig in that one, right? I saw people like complain about the evil 3D visuals and how it detracted from like the 2D platforming perfection of NES games. I saw people complain about not having a Metroid game on Nintendo 64. I saw people like rise up in opposition against Pokemon, like, oh, this IP isn't going anywhere. Like, oh, it's just a fad. Like, I'll say it for 25 years. Like, oh, actually 30 now. 30 years, but Pokemon's just a fad. People are going to move on from it once they get bored of it. Like, again, I grew up on this, right? Like, I knew people who would scream at you constantly about how Nintendo wasn't as good as they used to be, right? And it was never really true, right? Because new people were always coming in, always playing on new hardware and new games, and we're finding more and more appreciation for lesser known Nintendo properties. Nintendo Wars became popular, Fire Emblem became popular, right? Kid Icarus Uprising has a really solid following now, even though so many people like came out and rallied against it for the control scheme, right? You have like all of these like franchises that that have like just found new fans over the years, while the NES fanboys just kind of like live in the past. They can't move on from like their childhood in the 80s, right? They can't bring themselves to face the fact that the majority of the gaming audience, the majority of modern gaming fans don't necessarily see the NES as peak Nintendo anymore, right? Like, again, there have just been so many good games over the years that it's really difficult for anyone to seriously argue that the NES is a particularly noteworthy console outside of like the pure nostalgia factor of people who grew up with it, right? Like, again, I've seen so many people like demonizing Super Nintendo games, you know, for daring to be easier than NES games, even though they have like way better visuals, like gameplay, sound, like just everything is just a blatant upgrade. Like, oh, it's not as hard, so that makes it lesser. Like again, I've played a lot of Mario World recently, and I can tell you that that game is better than Mario 3. It has a much better final world. It has like better secrets, right? It has more replay value, right? I like the map screen more, right? Like, I think the music is more iconic, right? Like, again, the visuals are better, right? Like, Yoshi, right? There's all these things that come together to make a better product. But there is this stubborn refusal from certain people to really acknowledge that, to really respect it, to acknowledge that people genuinely like the newer Nintendo games, right? Like the almost religious fanaticism I've seen, like trying to downplay Tears of the Kingdom, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, WarioWare Move It, um, Princess Peach Showtime, right? Like I've just seen so many people come out and try to call these games like complete garbage, but it's very clear to me that these games are going to garner an audience and are going to be very, very popular going forward. I don't see that changing anytime soon, but the community delusionally wants to continue this farce that Nintendo peaked in the 80s and that it's just been a downward spiral ever since. But that simply isn't true. And I do think we really do need to start like condemning this mindset because it is absolutely disgusting. It is disrespectful to the younger Nintendo teams. It is disrespectful to the newer games, the newer hardware, younger fans because of how they patronize us, right? To me, I I think I should have been more comfortable coming out and like criticizing Mario 3 a lot earlier, right? But because of just like how religiously the game is viewed in some circles, like I just never really felt comfortable doing it. But here I am now, coming out and saying that Mario 3 is not nearly as good as people make it out to be.